Okay, so that was a pretty interesting morning in court. I walked in at about 9:40 a.m. It's I.O. Lee Shirtse on the stand. Shortly after, Mr. Wee, Dr. Jipson, Quah's counsel, begins his cross-examination of I.O. Lee Shirtse. Mr. Wee was questioning I.O. Lee Shirtse about certain fields in a document in question, such as age, date of birth, gender, about why they were not redacted from the report. The I.O. replied that they're auto-redacted, or not, by the system, so he wouldn't know the exact reason. We then asked, how did Victor Tong get designated as officer in charge? Shrutia says, I don't know. We says, let me clarify. Ho Che Hin says, someone is coming, make a police report, please facilitate, put down your name instead of his as the informant, designate the case as sensitive, put down Victor Tong as officer in charge. And Shrutia says, yes. After some further questions, we asked, if you put down your name as the informant, why didn't you sign as the informant? Shrutia asks for some time to review the document. Shrutia then goes on to say, usually we will have to sign off on the system, so I'm not sure why the signature is not on the document. We clarifies that that's not his question. He clarifies what his question is. And Shrutia eventually says, I did sign. So we says, oh, so you did sign in the system. And Shrutia says, yes. And we says, okay. Then there seem to be some differences in a document between two different copies, and Mr. Wee says to the judge that he needs a break to gather the provenance of the documents. Court resumes, and Mr. Wee highlights to the judge something about a certain document not having a certain certified true copy stamp. Mr. Wee, the prosecution, the judge, and the other defense parties agree that it's okay to finally admit this. The prosecution clarifies as a defense something. I didn't get the word because I'm in the back of the courtroom. Basically, they agree on how to submit this document and how to have it in evidence and how to proceed, basically, if I can simplify there. Mr. Wee agrees, but I couldn't catch the word of what they said as a defense something. Mr. Wee then asks I.O. Shutse about the digital signing of this report. He asks if the I.O. knows who would sign this report digitally. He also asks if the I.O. knows why a report would need to be signed digitally. The I.O. says all police reports are digital nowadays. Mr. Wee proceeds and suggests to the I.O. that the document was digitally signed 3 days after the I.O. took his statement. He says the I.O. can agree, disagree, or say he doesn't know. The I.O. disagrees. Mr. Wee then proceeds to ask a series of questions, including, you also don't know who signed it digitally, correct? To which the I.O. replied, correct. Mr. Wee then ends his cross-examination shortly after. Mr. Thomas Chua, one of the accused, who's self-representing himself, then starts his cross-examination. And it was quite a vigorous and passionate one, if I may add. He establishes with the I.O. that the I.O. is both the informant and the statement taker for this report. He asks why. The I.O. mentions again, as he did to Mr. Wee, that he was asked to write down his name as the informant. Mr. Chua then asked certain questions about why the I.O. was present at the location where this report was taken. Mr. Chua also asked who was the officer in charge of this report, and the I.O. says it was a Victor Tong. Mr. Chua then mentions that in his own interview by the MOH, along with Dr. Quah's, that the interviews ended around 5 to 6 a.m. He then asks, before MOH finished their interview with us, can they make a complaint or report to the police? Or can they communicate with the police? So he says, let's say MOH finishes the interview with us at 5:30 a.m. Then they head to cantonment to make a police report. That would be the correct procedure, correct? And Shitya says, I wouldn't know their procedure. Mr. Chua then asks, since this report was made at 3:54 a.m., is it possible that MOH and the Singapore police force were communicating? And I'm paraphrasing Mr. Chua's English here. The I.O. says, I wouldn't know. Now, Mr. Chua says, I'm not asking if you know, I'm asking if it's possible. After a few more rounds of back and forth, the I.O. says, yes, it is possible. Right. Mr. Chua then proceeds to ask if he recalls who was at MOH after he reached there, after the I.O. reached there, because Victor Tong had said previously in court that he went to MOH, the Harbour front office, with I.O. Shute, right? The I.O. says, I can't remember. And Mr. Chua looks a bit puzzled and says, you can't remember anyone from all the officers that were present, not even your superior? And then the I.O. thinks about it for a while and he says, yes, I.O. Ho Che Hin was there. Mr. Chua then adds, what about Victor Tong? And he says, Victor Tong should be there too, with a little bit of a thinking look on his face. Mr. Chua then says, anyway, just to let you know, Victor Tong told us that he went with you to MOH. Mr. Chua then says, I put it to you, he had quite a few puts, but he says, I put it to you that the true source of the allegations was the MOH and not yourself. You can agree or disagree. The I.O. asks to clarify that. And Chua says, the judge asked Mr. Chua, do you mean in P33? So he says, in P33, is it? Mr. Chua says, yes. So the judge clarifies for the I.O. What Mr. Chua is saying is that the true source of the allegations in P33 was MOH and not you. And then the I.O. says, yes. Then Mr. Chua says, I put it to you that the report was prepared by information fed to you by MOH officers and senior SPF officers. Senior SPF meaning police force officers. And MOH, for those of you watching from overseas, is Ministry of Health. And he says, disagree. And then he says the facts were provided by the MOH staff. And Mr. Chua says the facts were provided by MOH staff and not senior SPF officers. And the IO says yes. And Chua says, if that's the case, then how is it not by the senior SPF officers and MOH officers, since you mentioned that your superior asked you to put your name as the informant, etc., as you said earlier in court? And then the IO clarifies the facts were given by the MOH staff. Like, my superior did tell me to do this and that for the procedure of the police report, but the facts were provided by the MOH staff. And then Chua asks, how did the superior who gave him this information, like tell him what to do for the report, Mr. Ho Che Hin, how did he feed him off? He said, how did Ho Che Hin feed you information about the case? And the IO says he wasn't fed any information or any facts. He says, I was simply asked to assist with lodging a report. After some back and forth between Chua and the IO, Mr. Chua concludes, so you are basically saying that you were only following orders from Ho Che Hin, correct? And the IO says, correct. Mr. Chua then goes back to the issue of the timings of the reports and says, since your report was at 3:54 a.m. and the evidence in court, which I'm telling you now, referring to this current court session that's going on, which is that our interview with MOH officers ended between 5 and 6 a.m., do you agree that this report was made during, like even while MOH was interviewing us, there was a police report being made? The IO mentions repeatedly that he doesn't know the commencement timing for the MOH interview that Mr. Chua is referring to, so he wouldn't be able to state if it was possible or not possible. Mr. Chua then explains that he doesn't need to know that, and he's not asking about that. He's simply asking about the possibility. The IO declines to give a conclusive answer. Mr. Chua then says to the judge that he has nothing further on the matter and will put it in his submissions. Then he continues to ask about procedures of creating a report. He says, what's the normal procedure when creating a report? The IO explains that he was a duty staff that night and that he was held up. He also said, I was held up by my duty staff. Personally, I'm not sure what that sentence means, but it's my understanding that he was there late. He did say the word late. He said, I was there late, and so on and so forth. Mr. Chua asked after a few more questions, are you saying that other than this report, you have no relation to this case? Because Mr. Chua did ask a few questions to try to understand the IO's involvement in the case. And so he asked that question. And the IO says, other than this report, there was also an interview conducted with Miss Koh. He says Mrs. Koh. And a couple of smiles from the defense counsel and so on. And he says Miss Koh. And then after a few more questions, Mr. Chua asks, would you agree with me that there is no proof that Brian Tan made this report? After a short answer from the IO, Mr. Chua exclaims, I believe I have explained to you clearly enough. Pointing perhaps to a little bit of frustration, I guess, as is normal when, people are going back and forth over finer details and so on. But that's my assumption. Feel free to ask Mr. Chua what he was feeling. I put it to you that you were made, he puts quite a few puts in quick succession. I put it to you this, I put it to you that. A bit quick for me to type out myself because these are my own typewritten notes. So I couldn't get all of them typed down, but I did type this one where he says, I put it to you that you were made to mark this report as sensitive, thereby restricting access to this report. Do you agree or disagree? He says, I agree. He had a few more puts as well. Like I said, since you're the informant and the recording officer, he says, there is no genuine independent complaint, and this is not an ordinary public complaint. And the IO agrees, after some clarification from the judge. Mr. Chua then asks if he remembers what time he returned to cantonment, after the MOH episode, after they went to the office and went back, and who he returned with. He said he doesn't remember. Mr. Chua ends his cross-examination. And now I shall go back up for Ms. Iris Koh's cross-examination, for which I am 6 minutes late. Thanks to making this video. But see you guys in a bit. I'll report back as soon as I can. Thank you. And bye-bye.